Hi there, and welcome to Chapter 9 on middle childhood, physical and cognitive development. So it depends on who you talk to in psychology, but middle childhood is usually considered between the ages of 6 years old and 12 years old. So let's go ahead and get started. So, physical development, especially in terms of height and weight, really slows down in middle childhood, but changes still are occurring. And this is often when we see what people refer to as the awkward phase. On average, kids in middle childhood gain about 2 inches in height and 2 pounds in weight per year. Their head size becomes more in line with their body. When we're 4 years old, our heads make up a quarter of our body, and by adulthood, our head is 1/7 the size of our body. And so when we're in middle childhood, the head starts kind of normalizing itself and becoming more in line with the rest of our body. Our permanent teeth come in middle childhood, and this changes the shape of our jaw. Our arms and legs stretch and get longer, but our feet and hands grow more slowly, contributing again to that awkward phase. We see the trunk, the stomach area get longer, and it gets thinner. So you kind of lose that baby belly generally around middle childhood. And then often in middle childhood, kids go through a growth spurt. It usually occurs toward the end of middle childhood. For some people, it doesn't occur until adolescence. And this is because it is related to puberty. So it happens in girls before it happens in boys. But puberty is happening earlier than ever before, so the growth spurt is happening earlier than ever before. In terms of puberty, 15% of girls reach puberty by age 8, and the average onset of menarche, or the first menstrual cycle, is on average by age 12 for girls. So that's why we're seeing the growth spurt happen earlier for females. When the growth spurt is occurring, usually the weight gain happens first, and then the height happens after that. Or the growth in height happens. Okay, let's go ahead and watch two short videos on physical development in middle childhood.
Middle childhood is the stage of development between the ages of 6 and 12 years. There are many factors that impact a child's overall physical development. We will examine how children acquire new gross and fine motor skills and reach physical milestones. We'll learn how increased use of technology and electronic media, as well as the reduction of outdoor activities, can affect physical development. We will see how nutrition and the proper amount of sleep are also important. Finally, we will learn how teachers can support their students who may have challenging physical conditions. Heredity, culture, gender, nutrition, and other factors contribute to the wide variations seen in the physical growth of children this age. Children usually grow about 2 to 3 inches per year during their elementary school years. By age 10, girls often experience a growth spurt and commonly grow taller than boys their own age. This is the only time during the lifespan that girls are, on average, taller than boys. The average height for 11-year-old girls is 4 feet 10 inches, compared to 4 feet 9.5 inches for boys of the same age. It is common to see variations of up to 6 inches in height among children of the same age during middle childhood. Weight gain is usually slow and steady. Boys and girls gain approximately 5 to 7 pounds per year during middle childhood. Children lose baby fat as their muscle tone increases. Their legs become longer and their trunks slim down. Boys tend to have more muscle and girls have more body fat, which they begin to accumulate faster after age 8. The onset of puberty usually begins during the ages of 8 to 14 for girls and 9 to 15 for boys. For girls, the first noticeable event is breast and pubic hair development, followed by a growth spurt. Menarche, or the first menstrual period, typically occurs 2 years after breast development. Boys experience the development of pubic hair and an increase in the size of their testicles. A growth spurt follows. With this beginning of puberty, teachers and caregivers need to provide appropriate guidance and direction. Another part of their physical appearance that changes dramatically is the loss of baby teeth and the emergence of permanent ones. Children usually lose and replace about 4 baby teeth a year during this time. As permanent teeth grow in, some children experience crowding or irregularities. An orthodontist may recommend braces. At this age, the jaw is still growing, so it can accommodate the changes that take place due to braces or retainers. Dental health is determined by genetics, hygiene, and dietary practices. The overall care of teeth is important during the school years because dental health affects a child's appearance, speech, and the ability to chew properly. An increase in height and weight, along with the loss of baby teeth and the beginnings of puberty, mark significant physical milestones for school-age children.
During the school years, children's physical development levels off.
By adult standards, though, it's still pretty impressive. They're gaining about 5 pounds and shooting up 2.5 inches every year. At this age, children have enough coordination and strength to master almost any skill. What skills they will develop depend on the opportunities and encouragement they're given.
Physical differences between the sexes and assumptions about gender will also play a role. Boys have greater muscle mass, giving them an edge in skills that require power, force, and upper body strength. In most cultures, boys are generally encouraged to play with other boys in these intricate team games.
I have a good idea. Let's play regular and tag, and when someone else is in, then let's turn it to freeze tag.
Girls are encouraged to try less strenuous activities that require dexterity and poise. Here they have the upper hand. Girls generally have much greater agility and balance than boys.
Okay, will you tell me about boys and girls?
Boys and girls.
Are they the same or are they different?
Sometimes different.
How?
Sometimes same.
So in terms of brain development in middle childhood, we kind of see more of the same from early childhood. The frontal lobe is still rapidly forming those neural connections. And remember that neural connections are just when brain cells, fancy word for brain cells is neurons, when neurons are linking up and talking to each other. And so when these neural connections are being formed, it causes the brain areas to continue to improve. And we see improvement in the frontal lobe specifically in middle childhood, which improves then the middle child's memory, attention, decision making, problem solving, and what are known as executive functions. We also see areas associated with sensation, which is the parietal lobe, and hearing, which is the temporal lobe, improve. All right, so like we talked about before, when we're born, we have billions of brain cells. The day you're born, you have the most brain cells you'll ever have in your entire life. And then as we continue on through our life, we go through a process known as pruning, where the brain cells that we're not using, we lose. The brain just gets rid of those. So the idea then is that when we are working with kids, either as parents or teachers, as early as possible, we want to try to keep their brain stimulated and keep them engaged so that they are actively using their brain cells so their brain cells aren't dying. They're not going away. And the more they use the brain cells, the more neural connections are made, which just create pathways for thoughts. And the more thoughts that we have and the more pathways that we have, generally the smarter we are. So we want to really keep children's brain stimulated so that they don't lose brain cells and they create neural pathways. A lot of people think that this sounds pretty scary, that we're just constantly losing brain cells all throughout our life. But the truth is that when we're born, we have way more than we actually need. And this serves an evolutionary purpose. In the event that we grow up in this culture or that culture, we might have certain neurons that would help us to adapt in those environments. And then our brain figures out which neurons we actually need and which ones we don't for our particular environment, and then gets rid of the ones that we don't need. So in a sense, we're not really losing anything necessary. For example, when we're born, we have a bunch of neurons that allow us to hear all the phonemes, all the different sounds, and all the languages in all of the world. And then as our brain realizes that we're not using the phonemes, say in the Japanese language, our brain gets rid of the neurons associated with those sounds, with those phonemes, and it begins to specialize or focus specifically on the neurons necessary for understanding our native language. And so this is a really good thing because it makes us experts in certain fields and gets rid of information or the ability to process information that we don't need. But we don't want to get rid of too many, and we want too many brain cells, and that's why we want to keep our kids' brains stimulated and active. So now we're going to go ahead and watch a video that talks about the importance of the development of the executive functions that I talked about earlier. So it describes what the executive functions are, why they are so important for our futures, and what we can do to help children continue to develop those executive functions.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Safety goggles. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on, a child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cube.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7. And plus 4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match prime.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
You're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Okay, go ahead and pause the video here. Go to Moodle, complete lecture activity 1, and then when you're finished, return to this point in the lecture. So due to the fact that physical growth is actually slowing down in middle childhood, one of the kind of myths or common misunderstandings about middle childhood and nutrition is that kids do not actually need more food in middle childhood than they needed in early childhood, which is a little contrary to what we probably want to believe naturally. The kids are expending all this energy and they're growing. Don't they need more food? But in reality, they actually don't need more food because they're not growing as rapidly as they were. It's all about quality, not quantity. On average, kids need about 2,000 calories per day. And it's most important to focus on developing healthy eating habits, especially before they go into those teen years or hit that growth spurt we talked about earlier. Schools can make it really hard to create these good habits in middle childhood because they have things like vending machines, and then the friends are bringing in food from home that's maybe not the best influence on what your kid's eating. One of the things that we know works in trying to encourage kids to eat healthy is making the food fun, making the food interesting. We know that kids eat with their eyes first, so you can look on the slide there and see a little lunchbox that has a Minion or Despicable Me theme. You don't have to be that creative, but just making it kind of fun can be a way to trick, we'll say, kids into eating more healthy options. Research even suggests that what we eat can actually make us smarter. So let's go ahead and watch a video on that.
Hi everybody, I'm Julie Auclair, and we've got a little food for thought for you today. We all know that we should feed our kids a healthy diet to help them grow big and strong. But did you know that there are foods that could actually make them smarter? Dr. Larry McCleary, neurosurgeon and author of the Brain Trust program, joins us now to fill us in on what these brain-friendly snacks are, and he's even got some yummy recipes for us to try. It's so good to have you here.
It's great to be here, Julie.
Thanks for coming in. Now tell us, how do certain foods help our children's brains develop?
Well, the way the brain works is one nerve cell talks to the other. So when nerve cells communicate, that's how brains do all of the things they do, both memory and learning and emotional IQ types of things. And that involves the wiring and rewiring of trillions of connections. And that's a big construction job. So we need raw materials just like bricks and mortar to build nerve cell contacts, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
So what should we be looking for in a brain-friendly snack? What should these foods contain?
Well, we want, it's kind of Mother Nature's fast foods because kids' brains aren't fully formed and they don't like waiting around, so it has to be prepared ahead of time. And they can just come home from school or while they're playing come into the kitchen and grab a handful. But basically what we're looking at are proteins because those make up the neurotransmitters, which are the compounds that allow nerve cells to talk to each other, and delicate fats, because when nerve cells talk to each other, they actually change shape, so they have to be flexible. And then we have to protect those nutrients from going rancid. So those are the three groups of nutrients we're going to be talking about today, and they, along with using your brain in a healthy fashion, grow good brains and keep them healthy.
So before we get to the snacks, what's the best time for your kid to eat any of these foods, to snack on them?
Well, really any time. A lot of these, not all of them, not like the fresh fruit, but many of them he or she can put in a bag, in a purse or pocket, and just between classes eat a handful. And that keeps the nutrients in the bloodstream going to the brain high all the time.
Okay, now you call these fast foods. Different than what some people would think of fast foods. This is not your drive-through window.
Mother Nature's fast foods,
Okay.
That's correct.
Let's start with the nuts. What makes nuts so good for you?
Well, we've got walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, and pistachios. And actually, almonds and pistachios over here are seeds. But that's okay, because these are nutrients that allow young plants to grow, and they're also good for young brains to grow. And they contain the delicate fats that keep nerve cells flexible. They also contain a high amount of antioxidants which protect those delicate fats from going rancid.
And they're great on their own, but there's a recipe you have for cinnamon walnuts that we're going to have on our website. We'll tell you how to get that in a little while. Eggs, they're great hard-boiled, also egg salad, but what makes them good for the brain?
Well, what's good is that there's egg white, which is a complete protein source, and the yolk contains special antioxidants that protect the delicate fats in the egg yolk, which are the omega-3 fats. And those we don't get enough of in our diet. So eggs are a great source of those. Now, they do contain some cholesterol, but the way the body works is if you don't eat cholesterol, your body makes it, and your body makes 90% of it. So eggs are not off limits as far as I'm concerned.
Tell us why we need seeds.
Well, seeds are great because they contain some essential fats that work with the fats, for example, in walnuts. These are omega-6s, these are omega-3s, and they work together as a packet to keep the nerve cells flexible. They also contain protein, and they taste great when they're drizzled with hazelnut oil and some other spices. So these are a treat.
You'll be sharing your hazelnut pumpkin seed
That's right.
recipe with us. Can't wait for that. Berries, always good, especially in the summertime. And you're going to share your blueberry freezer treats, which is very yummy. Why do we need these in our diet?
Well, we have raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries. And these are nutrient-dense foods, which means they contain a lot of good things for our bodies and our brains, but very few calories. And what I like, of all of them, I like the blueberries because you can freeze them, take them out of the freezer, and they're like candy when you eat them. And you can get all of the antioxidants you need in a day from about 2/3 of a cup of blueberries, and it doesn't take long to eat that. And they're sweet, so kids love them.
They do. We love them any time of the day. Now, avocados, I think, are misunderstood sometimes. People say, oh, they're high in fat, but they're actually brain-smart food.
They are. Avocados, a lot of people think they're a veggie, but they're actually a fruit. They're an oily fruit, and they have surprisingly more protein per serving than cow's milk. So if you're a vegan, this is a good way to get protein. They also, because of their waxy consistency, obviously have some fats, but they have good fats, the flexible fats, not the trans fats and saturated fats that we shouldn't be eating. And they also have a great number of antioxidants. So they're a triple hit grand slam treat all in one, and they're out on the counter. You can just slice them up.
So make sure to get those into your diet. We're almost out of time, so we want to get through the last three here. Jerky, this is tuna jerky, but there are lots of flavors.
That's right. Tuna jerky is good because it contains the long chain version of the omega-3 fats, which really get directly incorporated into brain cells. Dark chocolate.
My favorite on the table here.
The great number of antioxidants. Don't have milk chocolate, have dark chocolate, which doesn't have milk chocolate in it, because that impairs the absorption of the goodies in the dark chocolate.
Ah, well that makes sense. Okay, and finally cinnamon. This isn't necessarily good on its own, but to add to your snacks.
Well, cinnamon's great for kids because it's got a sweet taste, and it goes with a lot of things. Fruit, flaxseed, you can dip things in it. And if you toast it, it's nutty. And it makes your brain, allows your brain to burn glucose faster and get smarter.
Dr. McCleary, thank you so much. You're going to help our kids do much better in school this year.
My pleasure.
We appreciate having you. And if you would like the recipes for any of these great snacks we have here, we mentioned those, you can find them on our website, www.parents.tv, and click on Health and Nutrition. Thanks for watching Parents TV. We'll see you next time.
As you probably know, obesity is becoming a major problem in our country, and it's really affecting kids, specifically in middle childhood. So obesity is defined as being 20% over the recommended weight for a person of a particular height and a particular age. So if you're 4'11" and 32 years old, you should weigh somewhere between 103 and 110 pounds. If you want to know what the appropriate weight for your height and age is, you can just Google body mass index, and there's charts where you can type in your information and it'll tell you what the normal range for weight is for someone your age and height. We know that 25 million children below 17 are considered obese or overweight, and research shows that kids between the ages of 10 and 17 that are overweight will probably struggle with their weight their whole lives, regardless of if their parents are large or small. Once they establish bad eating habits, or once they are overweight during middle childhood, it usually kind of becomes a lifelong battle. We also know that overweight preteens have a 64% chance of becoming an obese adult. So there's some things that we can do as parents or teachers or educators or community members to help avoid obesity. One of the things that we can do for kids is limit their TV time. We want to encourage physical activity as much as possible. Every day would be ideal, at least 30 to 60 minutes year-round, so not just in the summer when they play baseball or whatever. We want to serve fruits and vegetables at every meal or as much as possible. We want to watch fat intake because it's the highest concentration of calories. We want to teach kids healthy eating early on so they build those habits, and that's what becomes familiar to them. And certainly we don't want to put a child down for their weight or criticize them, because there are genetic components to weight. There are things that you inherit that determine how big or small you'll be. So we don't want to blame a child for something that may be out of their control. We just want to help them be as healthy as they possibly can be. Okay, let's go ahead and watch a video on the state of obesity in our country.
Resolutions to lose some extra pounds are common this time of year, and they couldn't come soon enough. As we begin this new decade, the country is facing a dangerous weight problem. Consider this: in the late 1970s, 15% of American adults were obese. By the early 90s, that number had jumped to 23%, and most recently, 35%. So how do we reduce our waistlines and return to a healthier state? Seth Doan traveled the nation to weigh what's being done about this growing crisis as CBS reports where America stands.
Okay, 3-piece dark 50 and a Diet Pepsi.
The evidence of an epidemic is everywhere. 2/3, 190 million Americans, are overweight or obese.
If you had to grade the United States when it comes to obesity,
well, I'd give us an F.
A national report card no one is proud of. Obesity-related diseases are a nearly $150 billion medical burden every year.
We're going to end up as a nation of cardiac cripples.
Childhood obesity has tripled in the last 30 years. This could be the first generation since the Civil War to have a shorter life expectancy.
It's not hurting, is it?
To gauge the problem, a team of doctors and cardiologists from Houston's Memorial Hermann Hospital set up a MASH unit of sorts in a middle school gym.
You're almost done. Just a few more pictures of your heart, okay?
Running a battery of tests on 97 seemingly healthy children.
I think it is a communication between the aorta and the pulmonary.
But the results?
Houston, we have a problem.
Reveal an alarming reality here.
3 out of every 4 children are either overweight or obese.
That means about 70 of these children are on a high-risk trajectory for coronary artery disease by their 30s and 40s. Dr. Joshua Samuels treats kids with the blood pressure levels of an unhealthy adult. Back at his clinic, 11-year-old Wesley Randall has dangerously high blood pressure and is 60 pounds overweight.
I just eat to solve my problems for some reason.
A few years down the road, these are the people who are going to be flooding into our hospitals and emergency rooms.
15-year-old Emily Allen is trying to avoid just that.
Just what I used to look like and then what I look like now kind of upsets me.
The Hudson, Michigan teen was healthy at age 5, but by 10 she'd become obese and could no longer fit into kids' clothing.
Why did I look like that?
It seems to me that there's some degree of pain or hurt in
Guilt.
looking at that. Guilt?
Mhm.
Why guilt?
I just feel guilty that I couldn't change it earlier.
On doctor's orders, Emily joined a weight loss program called Empower at the University of Michigan. That's better. Where she's already lost 26 pounds, thanks in part to support from other teens like 16-year-old Amber Bell, who's in an even scarier life and death struggle. She's shed 50 pounds, but still weighs nearly 400.
What made you say, I am gonna make a change here?
I didn't want my parents to feel like I was a failure, and I wanted to have friends.
For Amber, Emily, and so many families, the battle started with money.
So we kind of had to start buying cheaper foods and
And that's when you started gaining weight?
yeah.
Is it a luxury to be able to eat healthy food?
It's becoming more of a luxury.
Kelly Brownell studies obesity at Yale University and says the government does not help by subsidizing corn, an ingredient in virtually every sweetener. Corn farmers were paid $56 billion over the last 10 years by the federal government to grow their crop. Produce farmers, not a dime.
If you go to McDonald's today, you can buy a quarter pounder with cheese meal. That means the large drink and the large French fries for less than it costs to buy a salad and a bottle of water. There's something wrong with that picture.
We all remember that idyllic Norman Rockwell picture of 1950s America, but that has certainly changed. Today we consume more than 500 extra calories a day than a quarter century ago. It's easy to see why in a place like Baldwin Park, California, population 81,000. With 6 fast food restaurants or convenience stores for every one place that offers fresh produce, this community might seem at the root of the problem. But in fact, it's on the forefront of a grassroots solution. Here, they're trying to innovate. Connie Gonzalez and her mother, Maria, volunteer with the program Healthy Kids, Healthy Communities. The group pushed for a ban on new drive-through windows. Since 2006, not a single fast food restaurant has opened. Fresh produce is now stocked in stores that never carried it.
Maybe the big one?
And Maria flags the healthy food for shoppers. Connie helped convince the school board to make salad bars a staple. And 100 minutes of weekly phys ed is now mandatory. With all this, in 5 years, 135 kids here are no longer overweight.
Why does it take a whole community?
Because one individual can't really change much, but if a city comes together, we can change a whole lot.
But that's not enough, says Kelly Brownell. He likens the war on obesity to the one against tobacco.
The parallels are stunning. Marketing to children, distorting the science, influencing policymakers and the like.
The consumer is bombarded by the food industry, which spent $30 billion on advertising last year. And even the world's largest nutrition group, the American Dietetic Association, has a list of sponsors that includes the very companies selling unhealthy products.
The single best thing that ever happened to fight tobacco were high taxes on cigarettes.
Those taxes increased the cost for a pack of cigarettes and led to a drastic drop in smoking. Brownell's studies show that a penny per ounce tax on sugared beverages like soda would cut consumption and raise billions that could fight obesity.
Isn't it our own responsibility to moderate our behavior?
The personal responsibility approach is a fine place to start, but we've been doing that for 40 years now, and we're losing the battle with obesity. That's been an experiment that has failed.
According to Piaget, in middle childhood, we enter into what he called the concrete operational period of our cognitive development. And in the concrete operational period, this is when children begin to employ logical thought processes with concrete material. So children can take their thoughts and apply them to aspects of the real world, but the aspects of the real world have to be material in nature. They have to be things that the kid can feel, see, touch, smell. In other words, children in this stage still cannot think in hypotheticals. If they don't see it, they don't believe it. They engage in something called decentering when they enter into the concrete operational period, and this is when they can concentrate on more than one aspect of a situation. For example, they can see other people's points of view, they can multitask, and they begin to lose some of that egocentrism that they had in the pre-operational stage. So let's look at some other major developmental milestones that happen in the concrete operational period. The next one is called conservation, and this is understanding that an object retains certain properties no matter how its form changes. In other words, just because the shape of something changes doesn't mean the amount of it changes. We talked about this before in the pre-operational stage and having a lack of conservation, not being able to understand this. Well, now in the concrete operational stage, people in middle childhood can understand conservation. They can understand it as it relates to a variety of different aspects: numbers, length, volume. And one of the reasons that they understand conservation now is because they also have the ability to do what's called reversibility, which is retracing your thoughts or thinking backwards. This is why they can now solve that famous water problem, because they can mentally pour the water back into the first glass and understand that the amount of water did not change just because the size of the cup changed. Let's go ahead and watch a video that covers these ideas of conservation and reversibility.
In middle childhood, children show dramatic changes in their thinking, entering what Piaget called the concrete operational stage of cognitive development.
Knows what?
During the concrete operational stage, children begin to use logical instead of intuitive perception-bound reasoning. They are no longer fooled, for example, by Piaget's classic conservation tasks.
Do these two look like they're about the same amount? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Smash that down. Are they still the same?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Do these two have the same amount?
Yes. Yes, they still have the same amount.
When these children are asked why they believe that the taller glass or the flattened Play-Doh contains the same amount, their explanations illustrate that they are now able to decenter, or to think about more than one aspect of a problem at a time. They are able to follow the transformation from beginning to end and to mentally reverse the process, achieving a logical milestone that Piaget called reversibility.
Just because this glass was poured into there, doesn't mean that it isn't the same amount. It might be short a drop or so, but it's still the same amount.
Because just because you flatten it doesn't mean it changes. Because it's all you did was just smash it down. It didn't change.
This before was this shape, and just because this is flat now doesn't mean that it dropped mass or accumulated mass.
The next major developmental milestone is seriation, and this is the ability to arraign objects by increasing or decreasing size, like you see in the picture of those animals there on the slide. Another major developmental milestone in the concrete operational period is called classification, and this is the ability to group objects with some similarities within a larger category. So it's just being able to make categories, basically. For example, knowing that apples, bananas, and grapes are all types of fruit. Okay, let's go ahead and watch a video now on classification.
Now I'd like to ask you a different kind of question. Suppose all the animals in the world were to die.
Yes.
Would there be any birds left?
No.
Why not?
They're animals too.
And suppose all the birds in the world were to die. Would there be any animals left?
No, yeah, yes, there would be animals, yes.
How do you know?
Well, not all animals are birds.
Okay, thank you very much.
In the responses of the children to these classification tasks, we find illustrated the sequence of developmental stages Piaget has described. At the pre-operational stage, the child is beginning to abstract a common property from the objects and to find that property in many objects. Then, at the stage of concrete operations, multiple classification, class inclusion, and hierarchical classification become possible. In this film, we have not illustrated the stage of formal operations, in which the subject would be able to set up a hierarchical classification scheme by defining the necessary criteria for members of the superordinate and subordinate classes. The concrete operations necessary for classification are usually mastered by 10 or 11 years of age. Teachers who deal with younger children can analyze their teaching program in terms of demands for logical classification.
All the rest, shall we just put them together? Okay. What would you call these? Do you know the name of this particular kind? No, I mean all of these together.
All right, and the last major developmental milestone in the concrete operational period is called numeration. And this just means the ability to grasp the meaning of numbers. And generally by middle childhood, kids have conquered and mastered all of these milestones that we've talked about. Let's go ahead and watch one more video on a couple of kids doing a numeration task. So for a long time, the way psychologists thought that we should measure intelligence was by calculating people's IQ scores. And actually, we found out that getting one number to sum up a person's entire intelligence is probably not really very reliable or valid. And so new theories about intelligence have come out more recently, showing the complexities of intelligence, which is a little bit more realistic. One theory comes from a gentleman by the name of Howard Gardner, and he has 8 different types of intelligence. Basically, his point is that it doesn't really matter how smart you are. Instead, it matters how you are smart. So what areas of intelligence do you really thrive in? What is your brain kind of defaulting to when it's thinking about the world? And he says that most of us have 2 or 3 types of intelligence that we're really strong in. So the 8 different types are verbal linguistic, and this is the ability to really use vocab and language to express your thoughts. Logical, mathematical, these are people who are really scientific minded, very analytical, good at science, good at math, good at breaking things down and analyzing them. Visual spatial intelligence is the ability to kind of be artistic, to see the different relationships between physical aspects in the world. So visual spatial people often do become artists or architects. They're good at packing. They just have good awareness of the relationship between stimuli within their environment. The next one is musical intelligence, and this is people who have a natural ability to hear the different sounds in music, to recognize patterns in music. They often are very good at composing music or studying to music, for example. The next type of intelligence is bodily intelligence, and this is people who learn best by movement. They are usually really good at sports. They just understand how their body works, and their brain has a really linear relationship with movement, and it really adapts to anything requiring physical agility. The next type of intelligence is the naturalistic type of intelligence, and this is the ability to distinguish between living things as well as being sensitive to things that occur in the natural world. So people that are high in naturalistic intelligence are going to be like your Bear Grylls, Survivor Man, people that just know how to exist in nature. The next one is intrapersonal intelligence, and this is being self-aware, being self-smart, knowing what makes you tick, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, knowing why you have certain emotions to certain things that occur in your life and in different situations. The next one is interpersonal, and this is really being able to understand other people, being able to read body language very well, being sensitive to other people's facial expressions, being able to empathize with others pretty easily. And then the last one is existential intelligence, which actually was added to Gardner's theory. He added it in 2006. And so this is the ability to kind of philosophize about why we're here on Earth, what the purpose of life is, what happens after we die. You might see people that are philosophers be this type of intelligence, or spiritualists, for example. So these different types of intelligence help to explain a lot about human behavior. And one of the ways it helps us is to understand autism. There are some people that have what's known as Asperger's, which is a high functioning form of autism in a lot of cases. But what we'll see is that these autistic people might have deficiencies in like interpersonal intelligence, but then have very strong ability in visual spatial, for example, or logical mathematical, or verbal linguistic. And so understanding the differences between intelligences has helped us to understand things like Asperger's and autism. So let's go ahead and watch a gentleman with Asperger's that has some very special gifts.
I'll get kind of overwhelmed sometimes by different noises and different sounds. I ended up actually living in a homeless shelter, and I was going to libraries and reading and drawing.
George Widener has a mysterious talent and obsession for calendars.
16, 23, 30. June 6, 13. Calendar dates have rhythm, they have motion, they reflect, they balance each other. June 7th in 1803 is a Tuesday, and June 7th, the year 3081 is a Tuesday.
His memory for dates and numbers is remarkable, and he has a recall of history, and he's able to put that all together.
The Yellow Pages, the first phone book came out February 1878. New Haven, Connecticut. There were only 50 names.
Psychologists have a name for George's combination of obsessive behaviors.
It wasn't until my late 20s that a counselor said, "Oh, George, have you ever heard of Asperger's syndrome?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of that."
Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder. It's marked by difficulties in social interaction, with repetitive behaviors such as rocking back and forth, and restricted interests, calendars, or the Titanic, for example.
The Titanic was 882 feet, 8 inches long, and 97.5 feet wide. It had a 100-ton rudder, 16 major compartments, and 9 decks. It's like a very high-functioning person with autism. It's what I am. Yes.
Another theory of intelligence is called, it was created by a psychologist named Sternberg, who we talk a lot about in this class. But he called his theory the triarchic model of intelligence, and he argues that there's really 3 main components of intelligence. The first is called the components, and so the components give us information processing skills that contribute to intelligent behavior. And there are meta-components, which help us plan, monitor, and evaluate problem-solving strategies that we've used. There are performance components, and these help us to execute those meta-components. And then there are knowledge acquisition components, which help us learn how to solve problems. So for example, let's say you're writing a paper. The meta-components help us to choose a topic, outline what we're going to write about in our paper, and then once we're done writing it, evaluate the final draft. The performance components help us to actually write the paper, and then the knowledge acquisition components help us to research the topic that we're going to write about in our paper. Okay, the next major component of Sternberg's triarchic model of intelligence is experience, and this improves our ability to deal with novel tasks and become more automated in dealing with them. For example, when you first started driving, you had to think about every step that you were doing. You had to remember to put your right foot on the gas pedal and not use your left foot if it was not a stick and an automatic. You had to remember to keep your hands at 10 and 2 and the acronym SMOG, shoulder, mirror, over the shoulder, go. There's a lot to take in and a lot to remember, but as you became more familiar with driving, it became an automated process. And now maybe you zone out while you're driving and think about your friend Joe or what you're going to wear tomorrow. Hopefully you don't zone out too much. All right, the next component is context. And so context refers to adapting, shaping, and selecting our environments. And Sternberg says that intelligence should be viewed in the context that it occurs in. In other words, we should consider culture in determining and measuring what intelligence is or how intelligent someone is. For example, perhaps in some remote villages, intelligence might depend on hunting ability, whereas in the Silicon Valley, intelligence might be measured by computer skills. Okay, let's go ahead and watch a video on Sternberg discussing his theory further.
The basic idea of the triarchic theory is that people who are intelligent know what they do well, and then they make the most of it in their life. They somehow incorporate it in their lives and use it. They figure out what they don't do well, their weaknesses, and then they find ways around that.
I believe that one of my strengths is that I know what it is that I don't know, and I try to use the resources around me. Many of the people that work with me, for example, have skills in particular areas that are much stronger than mine, and I enjoy that because I know that I can go to that individual and ask a question about something that I don't know too much about.
The triarchic theory focuses on 3 critical areas: analytical ability, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence.
Analytical intelligence is what you use when you analyze things like problems. So, for example, you analyze a mathematics problem, or you might compare and contrast 2 systems of government, or you might critique something like critique a concert. What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Why? But the basic idea is this sort of critical thinking that you do. Practical intelligence is what you use when you put into practice your abilities. So, for example, you learn something in a math class and you use it in doing your income taxes. Or you might implement something, like you or someone else has come up with a plan. And it's one thing to have the plan, but can you really make it work? Creative intelligence is what you use when you come up with good new ideas. So you might create a poem, or you might create a work of art, or you might create a relationship with somebody. Or imagine what it would be like if temperatures in the world increased 20 degrees all of a sudden. What would be the effects? So what's common to all these things is thinking in relatively novel ways rather than familiar ways.
When we enter into middle childhood, we're able to begin thinking critically and problem solving in a way that we really couldn't do when we were younger because of our limited cognitive abilities and how far our brain had, or in this case had not developed. So now that children have more knowledge and more cognitive abilities, we also have to teach them how to think, how to use that knowledge, how to apply, analyze, evaluate, synthesize information. And so one of the things that we can do to help them practice and learn critical thinking is called the Socratic method of teaching, but you can use it in the classroom or in the home. And this really allows kids to improve their critical thinking skills basically what it is it's derived from Socrates, who was a philosopher that when he would teach people, he would often just ask them questions and guide them so that they could work on their own thinking abilities and arrive at different solutions. And so one of the ways that you do the Socratic method is by asking questions. And research shows that good questions cause kids to pay attention, process information, organize information, and compose an answer. All really important steps in critical thinking. So one of the ways to ensure that you're asking good questions is to make sure that you use the 5 W's: when, who, where, what, why. Ask open-ended questions. Make sure your questions are not just going to warrant a yes or no answer, but it's going to allow the child to expand on what they're thinking and really process through the thought. You want to be clear and concise. Don't be overly wordy. You don't want to confuse the child with the question. And don't pile on too many questions at once. Just ask one question at a time and allow the child to answer. When it comes to getting good answers from kids, one of the main techniques is to give kids time to think. Research actually shows that waiting between 3 and 5 seconds usually warrants the best answers from kids. And then finally, you want to follow up with a response to whatever that child has said. You want to respond to their answers enthusiastically. Don't just say okay and then move on. You want to stop and really let that child know that you've heard them. You want to clarify what they've said. In other words, recite it back to them in your own words. Expand on it. Relate it to other things. And then go back and synthesize. So maybe the child says to you, I think that baseball is a really good way to get physical activity and keep kids healthy. And so you say to them, oh, that's a really excellent point. Yeah, it is a really great way to get physical activity. And physical activity sure is important these days because of, what we know about obesity. And another way you could get physical activity, if you're maybe a girl, could be dance or something like that. So I really like what you said about baseball. It's an excellent point. Something like that is really going to encourage the child to continue to critically think. And then finally, we want to develop problem-solving skills. So we problem solve in all aspects of our life, not just when we're doing puzzles, but also in school, in our relationships with other people, with our emotions, with our perceptions. When our car breaks down, we're problem solving every single day of our lives. And so parents and teachers can really help children, especially in middle childhood, to develop problem-solving skills. And some of the things that we can do to help kids develop these skills is allow for mistakes. They're part of learning. We don't want to make a big deal out of them, and we definitely don't want to punish kids for mistakes unless those mistakes are like life-threatening or illegal or something like that. And we want to, as much as possible, make obstacles to problems a fun challenge rather than viewing them as a setback. So if you are, with your child and you say, okay, let's go out to the tennis court and play some tennis, and you get out there and the lights won't come on and it's nighttime. You don't want to say, oh, this is horrible, we're not ever going to be able to play tennis again, this sucks. You might want to just come up with some creative ways to create light and make it a fun game for the kid. Oh, hey, let's figure out how we can get enough light in here to play tennis. It'll be like solving a problem. And get them excited about obstacles instead of being defeated by them. All right, so let's take a look at moral development. Just to make sure we understand what morals are. They're a principle that we use to determine right versus wrong behavior. So let's go ahead and watch a video on a group of, looks like teenagers, discussing a moral dilemma.
You won't believe what I just had to do.
Did you get in a fight?
No. I applied for a job at this discount store, right? And I had to take a what-if test.
What do you mean, what if?
What's that?
Okay, well, here's an example. You're working as a cashier, and the next person in line is a friend of yours. The friend finishes eating a candy bar, and they put the wrapper into their pocket. What do you do?
What's hard about that? friend was trying to shoplift, just ring it up or lose your job.
Yeah.
It was more complicated than that. It was like, ask your friend if it came from somewhere else, call management or security to take care of it. You can pay for the candy bar with your own money or confront your friend. I mean, what would you guys do?
But if you just told the boss, then he would figure out if he actually stole it or not.
Right. Yeah, but it could be like one of those scenes in a movie where it really looks like somebody's doing something wrong, but he's not at all, you know?
I would just ask him if it came from somewhere else. I mean, if they're really your friend, they won't put your job in jeopardy.
Yeah, and he'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think a friend is more important than a job, personally.
Yeah.
A friend
I don't know.
steals, though. Yeah. But maybe they didn't steal. There's all, it's confusing.
On the job, at school, at home, and in public, moral dilemmas can occur. Sometimes, moral decisions are obvious choices. For example, grabbing an elderly woman's purse in a mall is clearly wrong and is also illegal. But what do you do if a cashier gives you the wrong change? Or you spot a $20 bill lying on the floor? Do you let the cashier know if you were charged the wrong amount? What if the person in front of you is $1 short to pay for their order? These are moral decisions made more complex because people have different points of view. For example, some people emphasize compassion. Others feel individual rights are a priority, and yet others feel respect for authority is most important. The definition of morality depends upon who you ask. One definition of morality is principles of right or good conduct based on honesty and rights or concerns for others. One thing is certain, moral development begins at an early age.
All right, so now that we know what morals are, let's talk about how we develop our morals. And that leads us back to the good old nature versus nurture argument. Some scientists believe that we are born with a basic moral compass or intuition. And they say that there's 5 basic morals that we're all born with. Morals regarding harm to other people and to yourself, fairness, loyalty, morals about authority, listening to authority, and purity, like not having sex till marriage, for example. So if you want to know where you stand on each of the 5 basic morals, you can go to yourmorals.org and take a test that'll tell you which morals are most important to you. On the slide here, you can see some of my results. Red is the, on the picture, red is the national average for Republicans, blue is the national average for Democrats, and then green are my results. So some more evidence for this idea that we're born with this kind of moral compass comes to us from a researcher that looked at some monkeys and treated them unfairly and then measured their reaction. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put 2 capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the 2 monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food than you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Okay, so since those monkeys seem to have a sense of fairness that you could argue was not taught to them, then this kind of supports the idea that maybe we're all born with this basic set of morals. But there is the other side of the argument, the nurture side, that says that we are taught our morals by our parents and our peers specifically. And research does find that our parents and peers have a huge influence on what we consider to be right versus wrong behavior. So which one more? What do you think? Parents influence us more when we're developing our morals, or peers affect what we think is morally wrong or right more? Well, the answer is they're pretty equal. In terms of how parents do in fact shape our morals, one study of 6-year-olds found that kids were more moral when they had parents who didn't punish too harshly but were firm in teaching morals. These kids were more sensitive to moral issues when they were taught to consider how their actions would affect other people, and they were more sensitive to moral issues when they had older siblings that were friendly and supportive. Alright, go ahead and pause the video here, head on over to Moodle, complete lecture activity 2, and when you're finished, come back to this point in the lecture. So Piaget was also interested in answering the question, how do we develop our morals, or at least investigating it. And he developed his theory of moral development by watching kids play with marbles and examining their cognitive processes. So how would you examine what's going on in someone's mind? Well, you have to ask them questions. And so he asked them what they considered fair and just play, what would violate the rules, and what punishment should be for breaking those rules. And as a result of watching kids play with marbles, he developed this theory. And so he says that in terms of morality, there's really 3 different stages that we go through in our development. And so in the first stage, he calls this lack of moral awareness and says this is from the ages of 0 to 4. Here, children don't really think about morals because they don't understand the concept of rules or breaking the rules. So when they're really young, they usually just say whatever, and they're not concerned with how it's going to make people feel. So sometimes kids can be brutally honest. And then in the next stage, we have what Piaget called moral realism, and this is between the ages of 4 and 7. And when we're in this stage, we think that rules don't and cannot be changed. These rules come from authority, and the rules should not be broken, no exceptions. And this really coincides with the pre-operational period of kind of thinking of everything in terms of black and white. For example, they might think that lying is always bad and not really be able to see that there are some instances when people lie and maybe it's good. Like if your significant other asks you if their new haircut looks ugly and you think it does, but you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you say it doesn't. A kid in the moral realism stage would say you should never lie to them and you should tell them their hair is ugly. But in the next stage, autonomous morality, when we are between the ages of 7 and 11, this is when we realize that rules can change and depend on the individual and the situation. And punishment should not come from breaking a rule necessarily, but punishment should depend on the intention of the person that broke the rule. So were they trying to do harm, then maybe they should be punished. If they were not trying to do harm, but they had to break a rule to do good, then maybe they shouldn't be punished. And so, again, this coincides with Piaget's cognitive development theory. And here he would say that if you're in the autonomous morality stage, you are in the concrete formal operational stage of his cognitive development theory. So, in other words, a person in this stage realizes that there are exceptions. As adults, we are in this autonomous morality stage and lie to kids all the time. We tell them that Santa Claus is real, that, the Easter Bunny's real, all kinds of different lies. But because we see that, rules in terms of morals depend on the situation, we're okay with that. And so also in this autonomous morality stage, we are more aware of social norms, and we are more aware of ourselves and how we might say things that make people feel a certain way about us or about themselves. And so we monitor what we say more, and this can lead to more lies, if you will. So let's go ahead and watch a clip of Jimmy Kimmel interviewing a child that's in the autonomous morality stage. And let's watch him kind of be concerned with what he's saying and lying in some instances because of the person he's talking about, or because of social norms, or not wanting Jimmy Kimmel to think negatively of him, but then being honest still when there are seeming consequences.
I believe that good sportsmanship and honesty are more important than just about anything when it comes to sports. So I took it upon myself to share that lesson with the next generation of professional athletes, kids, by hooking them up to a fake lie detector and driving them crazy. And here's how that went. Well, hello. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thank you for coming. I'm Officer Jimmy. This is the Truth Fairy. The Truth Fairy is going to hook you up to a machine right now. Do you know what a lie detector is?
Yeah.
A lie detector is a machine that can tell if you're lying or telling the truth. So you must always tell the truth, okay?
Okay.
All right. And then we're going to put this on your head, and we'll be all ready to go.
Wow.
That's right. He's got more gel than you, Truth
Yeah.
Fairy.
Yeah.
Do you gel your hair?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's start with your name. What is your name?
Blake,
Okay, very good. How old are you, Blake?
7 years old.
7 years old. What grade are you in?
First grade.
Do you like school?
Yeah.
Do you like school?
No.
No. Why don't you like it?
I'm bad at science.
You're bad at science?
Yeah.
You don't like science?
No.
It's boring?
Yeah.
What courses do you like?
Math.
You like math?
Yeah.
Okay. What's 8 plus 8?
16.
14. Have you ever peed in a swimming pool? A little bit? Hold on, let me ask the Truth Fairy. Truth Fairy, have you ever peed in a swimming pool?
Yes.
You? Yes, yeah. I think we all have. It's fun.
It's great.
Sometimes I stand up on the side and pee into the swimming pool.
It's a lot of fun.
What do you like better, your mother or a puppy?
My mother.
Your mother? Why?
Because she takes care of me.
And puppies don't.
No.
Puppies only care about themselves.
Yeah.
Puppies are very selfish.
Yeah.
Do you hate puppies?
No.
Do you hate puppies?
Yeah.
Do you feel like I could get you to say anything with this machine?
No. Yes.
Yeah. Who do you think is smarter, your mom or dad?
Dad.
Dad? Why is Dad smarter?
He knows way more history.
He knows more history. Does your mom ever do dumb things?
No.
Does Mom ever do dumb things?
Yes.
She does. What kinds of dumb things does she do?
She says bad words.
Oh, she says bad words. Like the really bad words?
Yeah.
Whoa. Do you ever say bad words?
No.
Sometimes?
A little bit.
A little bit with your friends? What are some of your favorite bad words?
And stuff.
That's one of my favorites. I don't know if we can continue with this. Thank you, Blake.
Okay, the next theory in moral development is really the most popular theory. It was created by a gentleman named Lawrence Kohlberg in 1975, and he used Piaget's findings to develop this theory. So Piaget taught us that children think in concrete, unvarying terms, but adolescents can reason on a more complex level. As we get older, we understand that morals are not always black and white. There can be more than one correct moral decision, and correct moral decisions depend on the situation or the individual. Kohlberg said that kids must overcome the egocentrism that they have in the pre-operational stage before they can make valid moral judgments. And to develop his theory, Kohlberg used a moral dilemma, which poses a conflict, and the subject must justify the morality of their choices. You guys, when you completed lecture activity 2, did Heinz dilemma, which is a moral dilemma, and this is the same way that we would come up with someone's moral beliefs in a lab, or if we were testing them for research, as you did in that lecture activity. And by doing or using moral dilemmas in research, he developed his theory of moral development, and he says that there's 3 levels of moral reasoning. And so the first level is pre-conventional morality, and generally people in this stage are between the ages of 4 and 10 years old, and they consider things to be morally right or morally wrong depending on whether the action constitutes a punishment or a reward. In other words, if a person gets a reward for something, then what they did was right. If they are punished for doing something, then what they did was morally wrong. And so there's 2 stages within the pre-conventional morality. Stage 1 is punishment and obedience. This is where children follow rules to avoid punishment. They don't think about morality, but they just do things so that they don't get punished, or they do the right thing so they don't get punished. For example, they might say something or think something like, I'll share these toys because I don't want to get in trouble. In stage 2, Piaget said they have what's called naive instrumental behavior. This is where children obey rules for pure self-interest and to gain satisfaction. They start to think about fairness a little. For example, they might think, I'll share these toys so I can keep playing, and because I want to play with the toy that kid has eventually. In the second level of moral reasoning, we have conventional morality. And usually people are between the ages of 10 and 13 when they are in this stage. Issues are considered in terms of societal expectations and pleasing others. So in stage 3, we have the good boy, good girl mentality. And in this stage, we obey rules to gain approval. And we judge others' moral behavior in terms of intention. For example, we might think to ourselves, I'm not going to lie to my friends because they will think I'm a bad person. But it's okay that mom lied to me about Santa because she just wanted Christmas to be fun. In stage 4, we have what Kohlberg called the law and order mentality. And this is when we are concerned with authority and keeping social order, doing what's fair, not cutting in the line, for example. So an example of this, of a kid being in the law and order mentality, might be them thinking, I caught Sal cheating on a test, and I'm going to tell the teacher because it won't be fair to everyone else if he gets away with it. In stage 3, we have post-conventional morality. And this is when moral issues are considered beyond societal norms, beyond laws, beyond what is considered right or wrong by most people. And instead, moral issues and decisions are based on well thought out individual beliefs. In stage 5, morals depend on the law, but if the law is wrong, then the belief is that people should work to change it. For example, if the law does not support gay marriage, but I don't think it's wrong, then I should fight for gay rights. In stage 6, an informed conscience and internal beliefs determine morals, even if it does violate the law. So, for example, a doctor found a lot of research showing that a non-psychedelic form of LSD as an effective treatment for cluster migraines and strongly believes in it. So even though it's against the law for him to prescribe LSD to his patients, he does it anyways because he feels like that's the morally correct thing to do. Research shows that only 20% of adults ever make it to the post-conventional stage, and some adults never get out of the pre-conventional stage. Okay, let's go ahead and watch a video of kids doing the Heinz dilemma task that you did, and let's see what answers they come up with in terms of what's morally right or wrong and what stage of Kohlberg's theory they are in.
The basis of children's reasoning and judgments about moral decisions changes over time. Children between the ages of 6 and 10 tend to judge acts as unilaterally right or wrong, focusing on rules and consequences. Intentions are often neglected.
I'm going to read you a story now, and then I'm going to ask you some questions after I read the story, okay? Are you ready? Okay. In Europe, a woman was dying from a special kind of cancer. In the same town where the woman and her husband Heinz lived, a druggist had discovered a possible cure. But the medicine cost much more than the woman or her husband could afford. So Heinz, the sick woman's husband, then borrowed all the money he could, but still only had half of what he needed. Heinz told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell the drug cheaper or to let him pay later. The druggist replied, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." Heinz then became desperate and broke into the store to steal the drug for his wife. Should Heinz have stolen the drug?
No. No.
No.
No. No.
No.
Moral decisions at this age are made at the pre-conventional or conventional level and reflect either a punishment-reward orientation or the desire to obey rules and conform to social norms.
Why is it wrong?
Because you never know if somebody's hiding where police are close, and there are maybe police or spies sneak in there. Because stealing could turn you into a criminal.
Because you might get caught. You'll be sent to jail.
Even though she was finna to die, that doesn't give him a right to steal.
No, even though that his wife was in desperate need, it still isn't right to steal.
In middle childhood, children are only beginning to question the absolute nature of laws and rules and consider the impact of intentions on moral decisions.
Was it actually right or wrong to have stolen the drug?
I can see why he would do it, but I don't think it's right. Well, it wasn't okay, lawfully, but, it's better than somebody dying.
I would say yes, because he probably cares about his wife a lot and he doesn't want her to die, anything. And I would say no, because it's not good to steal.
The last perspective is brought to us by Carol Gilligan. She derived her theory in part because she felt like Kohlberg's theory was too male-centered and didn't really focus on issues that females deal with in moral development. And so she said that Kohlberg defined what a mature adult was as an independent thinker, someone who is clear in their decision-making, and someone who takes responsible action. And she really felt like this defined what a male would think kind of a morally sound person was like. But she said a female mature adult would have different qualities, like compassion, empathy, being tactful when communicating with others, taking a gentle approach. And she argued that men view morality in terms of justice and fairness, which is like more of a broad perspective, not taking into account individuals or situations quite as much. Treating everyone fairly and equally represents the highest level of morality for men. Whereas Gilligan thought that women view morality more in terms of compassion, and that for them, morality is very situationally based. That caring for others in need represents the highest level of morality, and you must take each individual and each situation independently and look at it before determining what's right or wrong. So she said that there are 3 stages of moral development for females. And the first one is when morals are based on self-interest and what is practical. In this stage, we ask, what will work for me? In the next stage, morals depend on how the outcomes affect oneself, but they also realize that they should consider other people too. Because parents say being good comes from concern for others and self-sacrifice, this creates an internal conflict. Because it is important for the woman to nurture and care for others, but they also want to consider what will work for them and what is best for me, and not only thinking about what will work for others. Okay, in the third stage, the woman decides that moral decisions should always include nonviolence, harmony, and compassion. And the conflict that was kind of existing in stage 2 really becomes resolved as the woman decides that the best way to make moral judgments is to always be considering what will work for me and other people. So all of this is actually discussed in a book that Carol Gilligan wrote called In a Different Voice. It's a very popular book, and so now we're going to watch a video of Carol Gilligan discussing how she came up with this theory, why she came up with the theory, and then a little more on moral development in women.
Well, the women started with a simple premise, which is that we live in relationship with one another and that we're essentially relational responsive people. So the idea of a sort of isolated individual standing alone, looking up at the sky for sort of eternal principles, whether they were Kantian principles or whatever, you know, it was like, no, look around you. You know, you live, it's like we live on a trampoline, and if we move, it affects a whole lot of people. So you have to be very aware of those relationships. So it was not as if women were taking the opposite. They were questioning the whole paradigm, not explicitly, but implicitly. I remember I was teaching a section of this class where they were talking about moral dilemmas. You know, if you were in a lifeboat and you jump out, you know, that kind of thing. So anyway, then there was the Vietnam War was going on and college students were being drafted. And in my section, we tried to talk about the war and the students didn't want to talk about it. And I thought that was very interesting, particularly the men. And the reason was, I realized, is that their decisions about the war were based not only on, you know, timeless principles of just and unjust war, but how their actions would affect people who they loved and cared about, their family, you know, maybe a love relationship or something. And they knew that to care about relationships was to be like a woman. So they didn't want to say it. But they also had enough integrity that they didn't want to misrepresent themselves. So I remember as a teaching move, we read Camus' novel, The Plague, which is if you suddenly find yourself in the middle of a city, you know, and the plague comes, even though you weren't responsible, what was your responsibility to other people and so forth? And I remember it was great because we were in this long discussion of this novel, The Plague, and one of the students said, that's the draft dilemma. And then we really started talking about it. So I knew that these theories that represented men as thinking only in the abstract, if they were morally mature and so forth, were not reflecting men's life either. But it was after that time of hearing women's voices, and I have to emphasize that because in that study we interviewed at street clinics in the South End of Boston and in University Health Services, we had a very diverse range of women's voices, both in terms of ethnicity and social class. And it was listening to other women that focused, for me, what was the problem in these theories that weren't representing women or men accurately. And that's why my book was called not In a Woman's Voice, but it was called In a Different Voice. And here's a different voice and a different way of listening to men and women and to ourselves. Instead of whose rights took precedence, the question was, what is the responsible thing to do when you find yourself in a situation of relationship where there seems to be no way of acting that will not cause hurt? So, for example, one woman was a nurse, and she was married to a roofer who was out of work. And she had scoliosis of the spine, and she had one child who was 1 year old, and she was Catholic. So her doctor told her if she continued the pregnancy, she would injure her spine, and she would be unable to work or care for her child. So what does she do? You know, it's not like whose rights take precedence. What does she do in relationship to herself, her Catholicism, the existing child, the unemployed roofer husband, her spine? And so instead of this sort of what's the absolute right thing to do, it's like, you know, what is the better thing to do in a situation where there's no good thing to do? And, you know, it was interesting because one of the things that was so amazing to me is as I listened to women, there was this understanding, particularly then, but I think still now, that the good woman is selfless, that the good woman, you know, is responsive to everybody else's needs. So I would hear women tell me that it wouldn't even matter what, like that they wanted to have the child because their boyfriend wanted them to, or they wanted to have the abortion because their parents wanted them to finish school or something like that. And I would say, you know, and they would say, and I want to be responsive to them. And I would say, that's great, but what do you want? And they would look at me and they would say, what's wrong with being responsive to other people's needs or to people's needs? And I would say, nothing. I said, but you're a person. What about your needs? And why is it good to be responsive to other people and selfish to respond to yourself? Because that's the word they would use. Whatever they wanted, if it was to have the abortion or continue the pregnancy, that was selfish. And they would look at me, this was in 1973, 4, 5, and they would say, good question. And it was this whole ethic of selflessness was morally problematic because it was an abdication of voice and relationship and responsibility. But if women came into these relationships, then it was going to be a different conversation. That's what that book was about. So, you know, I hadn't seen it, and it was a moment of, you know, what would you call it, like epiphany. And I remember sitting down at my kitchen table and writing this paper called In a Different Voice, just to make sense of the situation. And then it was amazing for me to discover that so many women felt the same way, that we were not supposed to say what we knew from experience.
So, research does show support for Gilligan's theory. One study found that teen girls do often struggle with the question of, should I sacrifice for others so that, you know, people will think of me as being a good person, or should I do what I want and be considered selfish? And this is something that they struggle with more often than males do, according to research. Ultimately, what they decide to do, whether they decide to sacrifice or be quote unquote selfish, depends on the relationship that they're dealing with and the degree of connectedness that they have with that other person. So the more connected they are to them, the more likely they are to sacrifice, and the less connected they are, the less likely they are to sacrifice. However, there's a little bit of a curvilinear relationship here, and that if they get really close to the person, like if it's their parent, for example, they might be more willing to be selfish than if it's someone they know a little less well. So in terms of language development in middle childhood, reading is really an important part in developing language. We have to learn to identify letters, connect them to sounds, decipher spelling patterns, and comprehend what it all means. Usually by middle childhood, we've kind of, or at least by the end of middle childhood, we've learned to do all of those things automatically, kind of without having to break down the skill of reading. By kindergarten, children have basic grammar skills and know on average 8,000 vocabulary words. And by the end of middle childhood, they know 50,000 vocabulary words, which is pretty comparable to what an adult knows. So, stage theorists argue that learning to read during middle childhood happens in 3 stages. In the first stage, we're between the ages of 6 and 7, and here we're learning relationships between letters and sounds and can read very simple text, cat, dog, 3-word sentences, things like that. In ages 7 to 8, we get faster at reading simple stories, and the reading process becomes more automatic. We don't have to sound out letters so much, things like that. And then in stage 3, we're between the ages of 9 and 13, and this is when reading is really now become a tool that we use to obtain knowledge. Non-stage theorists, people that argue for continuity, say that we shouldn't really be focusing on ages, but rather be focusing on accomplishing skills. And so they point out that there are really different skills that are predictors of whether a child is going to be a good reader or not. In fact, the No Child Left Behind Act focuses on the following skills as a measure of ability to read: knowing the alphabet, or alphabet awareness; phonemic awareness, knowing sounds of letters and combinations like CH, making the ch sound; reading out loud should be something they can do; having a pretty good vocabulary; and having reading comprehension. Psychologists have kind of a different measure of what is predictive of whether or not someone will be literate or illiterate, and then if we can work on those skills to help them be the best readers that they can be. So let's go ahead and watch a clip on that.
Whether you've had formal training in literacy or not, chances are that you already do many activities with your children throughout the day that researchers have shown to be effective in preparing young children to become readers and writers. Watch while early childhood educator Dr. Teresa Boulay shows you what you're doing right and why it works.
There's a great deal of research in early childhood focusing on early literacy that has produced 5 predictors or characteristics that are known to predict later reading and writing achievement. So if children have a lot of rich experiences in these 5 areas, they'll learn to read and write with more ease. Those 5 areas are oral language, phonemic awareness, alphabet awareness, concepts about print, and early writing with inventive spelling. It's really important that preschool teachers are aware of these 5 predictors and are thinking about them in their planning as well as throughout the day and looking for spontaneous teachable moments.
That's called an anchor. And they lower it down into the water, and it lands on the ground, and it keeps the boat to stay in one place.
A teachable moment is when a child is really interested in something, it's purposeful to him, and the teacher sees that and takes that opportunity to come in and to help the child to further understand or expose the child to a new aspect of literacy.
Think he's gonna?
Oral language is a foundation for future reading and writing.
You think so?
There's a lot of research that shows that there's a correlation between vocabulary and reading comprehension.
You make eye contact, and you know that it's all about them, and they want to share that. They want to make the eye contact and talk about all the things that you're talking about. They just get into it.
Wibbly wobbly, winning, the elephant sat on.
Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate sounds or phonemes in a language. It's an ear-like skill, so if children are using phonemic awareness, they're able to hear and identify how sounds are the same or how they're similar.
The elephant sat on me, wibbly wobbly, Watrick, the elephant sat on. Her name ends with an E sound. E sound.
Can you spell Kayla?
I'm waiting. Hey.
When discussing alphabet awareness, it's important to remember that we're not just talking about children's awareness of letters, the names of the letters, and the sounds of the letters, but really it's extremely important to remember that children need to understand the purpose of those letters. What are those symbols? How do I use them?
Take those basic letter recognition and you just incorporate it into your day. We had a child come in who was talking about the tooth fairy. She had lost a tooth. So we go on the big screen TV in our classroom and we Google teeth, and we spell it out together, and oh, what letter do you think teeth begins with? And they guess T, and then the next two letters are tricky because they're 3 and 4 and 5, and that's, although they could get the E sound, but not 2 E's. And we put in teeth, and then we hit search, and it comes back with this amazing picture of teeth, and they could find teeth, and they could recognize mouth, I think it was, because they talked about it was in your mouth. And then it turns into a counting activity, and you take it wherever the kids are, and you just run with it.
Children should be bumping into opportunities to see print in their environment, in their centers, in their dramatic play centers, their names on their cubbies, signs around the room, so they understand the purpose of the function of print, and they learn a lot about print and how it works.
In our classroom, we have environmental print all the time. We have the exit door, we have all the toys labeled in English and Spanish. We have children that have, their names, they come in, they sign in the morning, all the names are on the cubbies. The pictures that we do over the course of the day, any activity that we do, we take pictures and everything's labeled underneath. So it's like they're constantly being inundated with words and letter sounds.
To expand children's print knowledge or concepts about print, teachers need to be really careful or explicit in their read-aloud practice. If they're reading a book to children, be aware of using words like the title is or the author is, or use words to describe what they're doing.
Apples and Pumpkins by Anne Rockwell, pictures by Lizzie Rockwell.
Or help children to look carefully at the illustrations.
Go anywhere. Antonio says there's a car. Color trees. I need you to be able to see the story.
Teachers can follow along with their finger with the text to demonstrate that there's something there that they're reading, that text is important. Even though children aren't able to read that yet, they learn that text tells the story.
Antonio, could you point to the father in the picture?
There are a lot of ways that teachers can encourage children to get meaningful, purposeful writing experiences. Sign-ins are a wonderful way where children can understand the purpose of writing. When they come to the classroom in the morning, they know that no one will know if they're there if they don't sign in.
One of the first things that the children tune into when they're learning how to write is how to write their name. They usually start with the first letter of their name. Then they progress to the first letter in people that are close to them.
There's so much research that shows that these 5 predictors are critical in children's future reading and writing development. Oral language, phonemic awareness, alphabet awareness, concepts about print, and early writing with inventive spelling. It's really important that the teacher be aware of them and be able to think about them and sort of think through the lens of these 5 predictors throughout the day.
When it comes time to choose a book for a kid in middle childhood, because you're a teacher or a parent, it is important to pick books that are age appropriate, that are at the child's cognitive level. You don't want to pick books that are too challenging for their reading level because they can become discouraged. But you don't want to read books that are too easy for them either because you want them to feel challenged and grow and develop. You also want to make sure that you're getting books that are on a topic that's interesting to them and not something that you're forcing on them. And then books should also kind of be in line with where they're at in their development. So if they are learning to throw a ball or if they're learning to play sports, then you want to get them a book on that because that's where their interest is probably going to lie once they start reading the book at the very least. Okay, and then the last portion of language development refers to literacy. So literacy is the ability to read and write, and we see that kids usually fall into 3 categories: emergent readers, developing readers, and independent readers. So emergent readers are defined as children who can identify letters and recognize some common words. They understand what books do. For example, that books tell stories and that words and pictures lead to understanding, and that's why they're in the book. Developing readers are children who are beginning to understand the relationship between sound and symbol. They use words and pictures to decode the meaning of the word, as well as to decode or understand the meaning of the story itself. And they also start to use personal experience to understand the meaning of the story. In other words, they're relating what they read back to their own life to give them a better understanding of the purpose or the intention of the book. And then finally, there are independent readers, and these are children who can read ably and without assistance. They read on their own, they read when they are alone, they read to research or to gain knowledge, and they read for pleasure. Okay, that concludes this chapter. Please go to Moodle and make sure you do the journal and forum assignments, and then we will see you for the next chapter.